Welcome to Rights and Remedies, the podcast where we explore the law, the fight for justice, and healing. I'm Allison Mahoney, your host and a lawyer dedicated to fighting for the rights of survivors of domestic and sexual abuse, as well as children harmed by the child welfare system. Each week, we delve into legal battles and court cases, share powerful stories that demand change, and spotlight the cutting-edge practices that are helping victims on their journey to healing. So, if you're ready to dive into the intersection of advocacy and healing, subscribe to Rights and Remedies today. New episodes are released weekly, and we can't wait to have you join the conversation. Together, we can make a difference. Welcome back to Rights and Remedies. Before we begin today's episode, please be advised that we will be discussing child abuse, child neglect, and some other sensitive topics which may be triggering for some listeners. If you need to take a break or skip this episode, please do so and prioritize your own well-being. Today, I'm joined by Tiffani Dhooge, the president and CEO of Children's Harbor, a nonprofit child welfare organization in Florida. Tiffani, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Can you please tell me, what does Children's Harbor do?
Well, we focus on three core areas. We keep kids safe, and we do that through our residential group care program. We help families heal through our family strengthening program, which provides in-home counseling to families who are struggling in the community for free. And we also have an entire campus that's dedicated to providing affordable housing and wrap around what I like to call extended family services for our kids who have aged out of foster care and are trying to navigate those first few years of adulthood on their own.
Amazing. I do want to ask you about each of those separate areas, but first, can you tell me how you came to work at Children's Harbor? What was your path, and how did you get interested in this particular field?
Oh my gosh, that is going to be a very long answer. Are you sure that you have? I have been in this field for almost 30 years at this point. And I started at the bottom. I started entry level in child welfare as a transporter, because that was how I got my foot in the door. So I started at the bottom, and now I'm here. And I was
For those who don't know, what does a transporter do?
It's a taxi driver. That was the entry level position. I was like the Uber driver for kids, like when you have to take a kid to a medical appointment, or you have to, when a case manager has to have a child taken to a visit or to a court hearing, or just transported from one. That was my entry level position. I started out as a transport. I always like to say I started out in the broom closet, and I worked my way up through the ranks. From there, I went to case management. I was pretty obsessed with, in the state of Florida, we had at that time a unit that was solely focused on termination of parental rights. Mm-hmm. So my early interest was specifically focused in justice. And so I really subscribed to the philosophy at that time of, you're going to be a great parent one day, but this is not your day, and your child deserves an opportunity. And after we've exhausted reasonable efforts, and you've been given every opportunity to rectify the situation in your home, now we need to give your child a chance. We're going to terminate your rights, and they're going to move on to adoption. And so I moved into case management. And then from there, I was distressed. We're talking about the 90s. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the late 90s, early 2000, and the families that we were placing kids in at the time in the state of Florida, like the foster homes, were often worse than the birth families we were removing them from. I was mortified. So I went into the path of, who is training these people? How are they getting their license? Who's making sure that they're doing what they were supposed to be doing? And I really kind of merged into wanting to be a gatekeeper. That's what I called it, the gatekeeper, and represented an organization called Kids in Distress and helped them build a foster care program, a Cadillac program, so to speak, that if you were going to be a Kids in Distress foster parent, you were going to be the best of the best. You were going to love these children like they are your own children. And that really held that standard for 15 years. And I trained and licensed and grew that program into a showcase program, and then moved on from there and decided I would end my career in foster care doing the hardest thing that anyone could possibly do, which is care for teenagers.
So we talked about this a bit before recording the other day, that teens are considered hard to place.
Oh.
And at the same time, there's been this ongoing issue over the years of there being reports that there's not enough foster parents in foster care systems. Can you comment on how those two pieces, the interplay between those two pieces, if there's not enough foster homes and if teens are hard to place, what happens to teens then?
That is a great question. I just mentioned that I spent 15 years training, recruiting, licensing, matching people, and supporting their homes, foster homes. I can count on my two hands how many people in 15 years came to us and said, I would like to foster a teenager. Give me a moody, angsty, ungrateful teenager. Because even if a teenager is not traumatized, has not been victimized, they're still difficult. Like people don't like their own teenagers, they much less a child who's been traumatized and is going through it. So inherently, foster parents come into the system of care and they ask for babies or they ask for children who are younger than their own children. And as a professional, I would advise you, if you have a young child, go younger, don't go older. Just logistically, it is easier on the family system for you to do that, to put some measures in place in your own home so that your child can still be prioritized while you care for another. So inherently, people are intimidated by teenagers. It takes a lot longer to match a teenager to a home. I would never have matched a teenager to a new home. I would have waited for a seasoned home that had, because parenting your own child and parenting someone else's child are two entirely different things. So as a professional, I always waited a couple of years after a few placements before we even approached a foster home with the idea of caring for an older child. So right there, that's a challenge in itself. Teenagers will end up in group homes simply because of their age range, simply because there are not foster homes out there waiting for a 16-year-old boy. There just isn't. So they will end up in group care settings simply because of their age, while their younger siblings are placed in foster care settings. It's just a fact.
So they're separated. What you're saying is that they're separated from their siblings.
Yes, they will be. And in fact, with the introduction of FFPSA, which is the federal legislation that came into effect and changed the face of child welfare across our nation in 2020, there are specified settings, and no child under the age of 12 can be placed in a group care setting. So if you had a child who was 14, for instance, and an 8-year-old, that 8-year-old cannot legally be placed in a group care setting anywhere in the United States. So they're going to go to a foster home, and the 14-year-old will then, if there's no foster home willing to take both, will go to a group care setting.
Okay. Aren't children supposed to be placed in the least restrictive, most family-like setting? Mm-hmm. And if so, doesn't it seem like it seems like it's just an issue with foster homes that are actually available for teens, but doesn't it seem like that's not happening then for teens if the default for them is some sort of congregate care because there's not foster homes for them?
Well, be careful with the word default, because it's not a default. There is a movement across the nation to, I'm going to say, liquidate, empty out the residential group care facilities. And all residential group care facilities are wrong. They're bad. They're abusive. They're negligent. So there is a movement. It's not a default setting. It is simply that there are not enough civilians like yourself and your friends and the people in your network who are willing to step up to the plate and take a child who is over the age of really 7. Let's be honest. Over the age of 7, you become difficult to place. So the academics of this world can sit around in a circle and talk about how children should not be in congregate settings. I am with you. Children should be in a home with a dedicated parent who remembers that they do not like broccoli.
Yeah.
And that they had a spelling test today, or that they are not doing well in geometry, and help them one-to-one. But if those settings do not exist, and the world is not willing to step up to the plate and help these children, then congregate care is the only solution. And to eradicate the option of congregate care simply because an academic who's never worked in the field think that it's a negligent situation is irresponsible. You have to have a setting for them to go to if society is not willing to step up and solve the problem.
And when you're saying academics who aren't working in the field, who are you referring to for people who don't know that much about the foster care system who are listening right now? Can
I
you
would say
provide some context as to where this is coming from?
I question policy decisions. Of course, I'm going to. If you have never worked in the field, if you have never done the actual work of caring for a child or worked in a foster care setting where you have had to hold a child who is sobbing hysterically because their mother didn't make it to a visit, or a kid who only gets to see their sibling once a month, and after that visit is just broken because they miss them so much. If you've never had that experience, if you've never bled and been in the trench, I don't understand why you're making policy decisions. How could you possibly know what it is like to work in this field or the challenges of anyone who works in this field if you've all you've done is talk about ideas? If you're not doing the work, your ideas hold less weight for me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's my personal opinion, which is what you're asking for. I do think it is beneficial to invite to the table those who have spent their lives in the field working with these kids, who know their names, who hear their voices, and aren't just pontificating on concepts, that actually live it, and ask them their opinions.
So are you referring to policymakers in the government or academics? And along those lines, are you saying that they're not actually asking people in the child welfare system what's happening and looking at case files and doing that sort of research?
A case file is very different than a child.
Uh-huh.
Before we make a policy decision, speaking to the actual kids more than once, and speaking to the people who work with the kids. And I'm not just talking about people like me, because I would be considered an executive or administration, to use an ugly word, administration. You're in administration. What do you know? I just happen to have a long career in every aspect of the field. But some of my peers went right into administration and had never actually did direct care, I think would be the term that you would use. I would recommend to anybody, no matter what state, not just one focus group. Don't just sit with teenagers in one setting. Sit with them in several settings. Sit with them repeatedly. Like if you're going to speak, I've got incredibly well-spoken kids on my campus. But if you speak to Liz on Tuesday when she's mad, you're going to get a very different opinion about the same topic than if you come back the following Wednesday when she's in a different mood. Teenagers inherently are impulsive. I would speak to the kids. I would speak to them repeatedly, not just one time. I would speak to not just administration, to the parents that are in the house who know the kids differently. Miss Angel knows them very differently than the way that I know them. Miss Nicole knows them. I mean, these are all different roles within our organization. I hesitate to trust any policy that has been designed by a core group of individuals who are not actually doing the work with the kids and speaking to the people who are doing the work. And so I would challenge that. Whatever policy that you're looking at, I would challenge how inclusive that group was before they made their decision about how things should change in child welfare.
Okay. I think you've made your point. Let's move on and talk about Children's Harbor.
Yes.
You had said that you told me before that Children's Harbor has a unique history. Can you share a bit about how Children's Harbor came into existence?
My favorite thing about Children's Harbor is our origin story. I love it because a lot of the organizations that I'm aware of were state solutions, like contracted out of, Department of Children and Families needing something, so contracts given. Our organization was built by regular people. We were a solution that the community came up with. It was a regular guy, an insurance salesman who had no experience in child welfare, And in the 90s, he heard that siblings were being separated and he was incensed by it. This is wrong. It's bad enough that these kids are being brought into foster care, but to have to live separately. And honestly, in the 90s, we were separating siblings simply because of space requirements. The law says that your room has to be a certain size to have two children in the room. And then if you have a male-female sibling group, they can only room together, I believe, up until the age of 5. And then you have to separate them into different rooms. But in the state of Florida, people don't have big houses. Especially where we live, they might have like just one extra bedroom. So just logistically, people don't have the space to take male-female sibling groups at the time. So, or now, it continues to be a challenge. So he finds out that this is happening. He's incensed. He's like, there should be a place where siblings should be able to grow up together. So he calls up a buddy from his networking group and says, we can fix this. There was no intention of fixing the system of care. It was just, we can fix this problem that's in our backyard. And this guy called this guy called this guy. They all swapped what they could do, and they built a campus before they even had a contract. And then they went to the state and said, so we have this place. Do you have kids? It was like completely backwards and yet perfect at the same time. While we were building that campus, we started to provide in-home services to families who were struggling. Really, one of the first 3 agencies in our county to ever receive a prevention contract, a front-end services contract.
For those who don't know what that means, who aren't familiar with foster care, can you explain a little bit more about what front-end services are?
Absolutely. Front-end services are those when a family is struggling and they've got a lot of stressors in play, they are very high risk because of all of that stress in making a choice that will end up in their child being removed and placed in protective supervision. And so the concept of front-end services is meeting them before all of that happens. Let's wrap a family with services, whether that's counseling or additional support, like maybe medical childcare for some families, or transportation, or fiscal assistance, or wrap a family with services. See if you can alleviate the stressors that are in the home so that way we don't need to remove the children and place them in foster care. In our case, we were providing free in-home counseling, CBT therapy, or cognitive behavioral therapy for families who were needing short-term intervention. So 13 weeks, 15 weeks, just enough to kind of get back on their feet again, get their bearings. And that's what we did while we built our campus. That's what we continue to do today as well. But then we opened our campus, and the rest is history.
The campus, can you describe what the campus looks like? I know from what I've seen in New York and in my previous work, sometimes there might be different types of placements all in one building. Sometimes it's actually on like a physical campus of land with different types of buildings, whether one's a residential facility, one might be one for higher needs. What does your campus actually look like? How is it set up?
It looks like a suburban development.
Okay.
So we are located all the way out by the Everglades. So in the middle of nowhere, you have to drive a long way in Fort Lauderdale to get to our campus. And when you drive on, it's grassy. There's actually a dog park. There's a neighborhood dog park that's located adjacent to our property. You're going to drive up to a gate just like you would any suburban development. And if we allow you to come in, if we open the gate opens and it looks just like any neighborhood development. You'll see 3 identical houses in front of you that all have the same roof style, just like you would in suburbia. And then, of course, the offices are located on the other side of the campus, and there's a large pavilion in the middle of a huge soccer field. Soccer field's in the middle with a track around it, like a walking track. And there's a playground, and there's a full-size basketball court, beautiful landscaping, mostly grass because we are in the Everglades, flanked by large Florida trees.
How many young people are at
29.
campus at any given moment? And what's the
29.
average length of time that they're there?
I would like to say that by law, the children are only in foster care 12 months before permanency is established, but that is not the case. I would say average length of time is about 18 months before they either age out or a reunification or a family placement is made.
And how are you guys unique or different from other residential facilities in the foster care system in Florida?
Well, for one, we are exclusively dedicated to teenagers. It's all we do. We do difficult to place teenagers who have been through very, very high levels of trauma.
Mm.
So I always describe it when someone comes to visit. I say, if you've seen it in the news, we probably have it here. We are not caring for kids who are first timers. We're caring for kids who've been through. I've got girls who were trafficked by their own parents living on my campus. I've got a little girl who was impregnated by her mother's boyfriend, and then he tried to kill her when he found out that she was pregnant. So they've been through very, very high levels of trauma,
Yeah.
debilitating levels of trauma, for lack of a better word. And our job is to meet them where they're at and help them wrap their brain around what has happened to them and figure out how they're going to move forward from here. That's our primary focus. How a lot of the organizations in our county serve younger children. So first and foremost, what sets us apart is that we only serve teenagers, and we only serve those teenagers that people run from. The ones that have blown out, when you feel yucky, you act yucky. And so when you've been through high levels of trauma, you're grumpy. That manifests itself in some behavior. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those kids that no one has been able to make progress with. They don't trust anybody. They have a right not to trust anybody. Those are the kids that we're going to move forward with and show them what it means to be loved well. That's our mantra. Love them well. Love them when you don't like them. Love them when they don't like you. You're going to love them like they're your own child. And I would like to think that that's what sets us apart as an organization as well, that these are our kids and they're our kids when they leave. They don't just go to another placement and we never speak to them again, or they're our kids. From the moment that they step foot on that campus, you belong to us. We are now your extended family, whether you like it or not.
And so does the organization stay in touch with young people who have aged out or moved on to different placements?
Absolutely. If they want to stay in touch with us, we stay in touch with them. I still have kids blowing up my phone. And every kid will attach to different team members. So some kids attach to me, some kids will attach to it's personalities. Like kids gravitate to whoever they really. I don't know why kids gravitate to some people and others, but the whole point is it doesn't matter who they gravitate towards. If it's you, own them. If it's you and they trust you, own that. And whether you are the facilities guy or you are a house parent or you are in administration, if a kid gravitates to you, your job is to love them well. And if you need assistance or you need training or you need some guidance, we will get you there and what that means. But if a child actually opens up and trusts you, you're their person. So you're going to be the one.
I imagine that because your population is of teens who have experienced severe trauma, that your staff have to have a lot of ongoing training and supports to make sure that, to help them cope with any secondary trauma they might be exposed to. Is that right?
Yes. Secondary trauma is a little bit harder there's not a whole lot of interest in helping team members with their secondary trauma. It's interesting that you said that. I wish there was more because I think that we underplay, I guess. I'm not even sure if that's an appropriate word, but we don't think enough about what we see every day, what we hear every day, and how that impacts our team members and how that impacts their own mental health and their own burnout levels. So I wish there was more for that. But yes, the state requires, I want to say, I wasn't prepared for this question. I'm going to say about 60 hours of trauma-informed training, human trafficking, you name it. Their CPR, like your basic stuff, every single year. So it's a consent and volunteers too. I'm not sure if you know that. If you want to volunteer more than I believe it is 12 hours, 14 hours, you have to be trained at the same level as a team member.
Interesting. So you mean volunteers for your organization have to okay.
Very difficult to recruit volunteers under that new rule. I know, but it's necessary.
Yeah. And it does seem important. And then in terms of services for the teens who are placed with you guys, what kind of services do they have access to help them overcome and heal from the traumas that they've experienced?
Well, I'm going to say, but honestly, the truth is that most teenagers, when they come into our campus or onto our campus, they don't want therapy.
Mhm.
They absolutely do not want therapy. They all have therapists, court-ordered therapists. I will say one of the challenges of this field is that most of the time they're receiving an entry-level therapist, like a very young therapist who's trying to earn their hours and really is not ready to handle the level of trauma that these children present with. There's a very high turnover rate for therapists because clearly when they get licensed, they want to actually move on to a practice where they can pay their rent. So you can't really blame them.
I see. So it's a reimbursement thing.
Yeah.
It's an issue with how much they're being paid.
Oh, it's entry level. It's terrible. It's a terrible salary. But what we have done is we've been able to access private funding through foundations, for family foundations, and supplement that to ensure that every single child, when they come onto our campus, is going to receive private therapy. And we do group therapy. The kids really respond at a much more interactive level through group therapy. And we've also found with teenagers that I don't want therapy. I don't need therapy. I've had therapy. That doesn't work. And then we'll put them in a group therapy context. They'll establish rapport with the therapist who's doing the group therapy, and then they want private time. So when it's on their terms and they like the therapist, then they're very receptive to one-to-one therapy. So it's been strategic on our part. I hope they're not watching, but I don't need therapy. I don't want therapy. And as soon as they go to group and they have a great time, they're like, oh, can Miss So-and-so meet with me? So they receive group therapy, which then leads to one-to-one therapy. And that's all through the private funding that we receive from the DeLuca Foundation. And then we also have a I hate to use the word robust, it's so overused, but academic and life skills program, because I got to tell you, our kids are testing 2 to 3 grade levels below
Mhm.
what they should be testing at. And what we don't, or I don't think what the general public understands is that you might remove a child for physical abuse or remove a child for sexual abuse, but it doesn't mean that there has not been years of neglect.
Yeah.
So I've got kids who are 16 years old who can't read. And so we've been able to, through private funding, bring on a full-time educator. And so every child who comes to our campus, the very first thing that she does is take their IEP from the school, cross-reference it against their psychological evaluation, make sure that they're diagnostically assessed according to state standards, and then teach to that deficit. So she's able to immediately see, oh, okay, David needs this, this, and this, and provide that one-to-one specialized focused time with him to help him catch up to where he needs to be. Because you can't just dump a kid in an alternative credit program. Like you can't, that's typically the solution. If I'll use the word David, if David is behind, they're going to go ahead and take him out of mainstream school and put him in a credit recovery program. And those programs are designed to give a child a packet. It's a self-initiated packet. Do this work, and when you complete this work, you'll be on par and you can go back to mainstream. And the problem is that David can't read. So you can put him in the credit recovery program, but he cannot self-initiate. He cannot do it. So we have the one-to-one full-time instructor that can sit with him every single day and help him with that and get him to a place where he really can catch up to where he needs to be, or get to a place where he can focus on his next rather than constantly treading water.
Right. And I imagine that's probably very frustrating for a young person to be put in a credit recovery program like that and to not be able to actually do the work and to feel stuck. And the other thing I just wanted to add is why it's important, just to give some context here, what you're talking about with making sure that the young people have adequate education and can read and all of these things, especially the teens, if they're about to age out and become an adult and possibly be responsible for supporting themselves, then it's really important that they have those tools to be able to succeed.
The goal is that we're not working at, not that there's anything wrong with this, but we're not working in a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
Like, it's great when you're a teenager and you need some extra money, but the goal is that they are self-sufficient and can have, your long-term goals are we in a position where they're offering me health benefits? That's a litmus test. Are we in a position where I'm on salary and I'm not hourly? These are the goals that we are helping them set for themselves. What kind of lifestyle do you want to live? And then okay, this is what we need to aim for if you'd like to live this lifestyle. With the teenagers, it has to be self-initiated. It has to be their idea or they will not own it. So a lot of that work in the beginning is sitting with them and helping them establish what they want for their life, and then reverse and say, okay, this is how we're going to get there. This is the plan. But yes, reading, they have to finish high school. They have to be able to read. These are the stepping stones to being able to live the life that they want to live.
I feel like I could talk to you for probably hours. There's so much to discuss, especially with in terms of foster care systems, but I want to be mindful of time. So we started our conversation talking about the narrative that is currently in place, or the narrative that we're hearing about residential facilities and congregate care facilities. And for people who have listened, you know that I've also commented on congregate care facilities and some of the problems that are happening in our country. As someone who's working with young people and at an organization that has a residential facility, can you share how you would like to see the narrative changed or shifted, and if there's any inaccuracies in what you're hearing reported today?
This question's really hard for me because I am aware of the Senate report, and I also have personal relationships with leaders in some of the organizations that have been named in that report. And they are good people who are in this field because they wanted to make a meaningful difference in this world. And congregate care is villainized. At this point in this country, congregate care is the villain of child welfare. And yet, if I was to use the words necessary evil, which is also a terrible injustice to my peers, if there are no foster homes, I'll go back to that first statement. You're always going to have a stream of teenagers who need to be placed. It's not going to end. I wish it would end. I wish we never needed another home for a teenager. I wish that abuse never happened and that kids could be kept safe in their families. But the bottom line is that there's always going to be a stream of teenagers who need to be placed in foster care. And if society is not willing to step up, and let's keep in mind, one megachurch could solve this problem because there's not that many kids in foster care in nationwide. Church of 10,000 could absolutely make a dent in this problem. But if we're not willing as a society to step up and serve the kids who need us most, the most vulnerable, then we have to have a setting for them. And unfortunately, group care is that option. And the primary issue with group care, from my perspective, from someone who is new to group care, it's only been 7 years, and who is an advocate for one-to-one homes. Like, I absolutely believe that children belong in a what did you call it? Least restrictive family. Family, whether that's same sex, single home, traditional. I probably used the wrong word on that one, so I'm gonna get canceled for using the wrong word. Mom and dad. Okay. I believe they belong in a family. So from the outside looking in, the primary issue with group care are the kids. When you put 30 kids on one campus, there is going to be problems. And if you spoke to my kids, which, please come to Browns Harbor. That's our young adult campus. And most of those kids have lived for years in group home settings. That's what they'll tell you too. I would put money on it. They're going to say it wasn't the staff. It was the other kids that drove me crazy. It was living with 30 different personalities. Mm-hmm. And think about that. Think about how challenging that must be. You're not going to like all 30 of them. There's going to be people who tick you off. There's going to be people who poke at you for no reason. Like, it's just irritating. And that's the biggest issue with group home settings. Like, all of these is the stuff that kids do to each other. And you can't, unfortunately, even though I have 165 cameras around every single nook and cranny of the campus, you really can't be everywhere all of the time. You really can't. It's just physiologically impossible. Even when you have a staff ratio of 2 adults to every 6 kids, you're going to miss something. You're going to, inevitably. So how would I like to change the narrative? Every industry has rock stars and they have C- players. Whether you're talking about a sports team or you're talking about a standard corporation, you've got your A+ rock stars that you would like to duplicate a dozen times. I'd love to have 12 of you. And then you've got those you're like, I got to keep you on because I need somebody, but you suck. And there's no difference in residential group care. There are organizations that are incredible. They are doing everything they can to serve the children that have been left behind by everybody else. No one else is willing to do this work. And they are doing everything they can to meet the needs of these kids with funding that equates to a Post-it note and a paperclip. Okay. And yet being criticized for it. Nobody else wants to do it, but hey, let's villainize them. And then you have organizations that are just checking the box. You wouldn't want to put your dog there. So I definitely understand the public perception because I have been in those group care settings where I was like, I would not trust you with an animal, much less a child that I loved. But I also know organizations and people who are incredible. And I think we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The pendulum has swung too far. And so we're like, all group homes should be eradicated. No, they shouldn't. There's always going to need to be quality settings that should they be the default? No, they should not. Society should step up. Society should step up and decide that they're going to do something because we could do something about this. We could. We're just not doing it. And so how would I change the narrative? I'm not really sure how to summarize that. I think you're going to have to summarize it.
Maybe that it's more nuanced than people realize. It's not just black and white.
Not. It is not.
So
it really isn't. The world is not black and white. It's not just one or the other. And there's also kids, this should be noted. If I look at my campus right now, there are kids that would do beautifully in a family setting. Would we have to transition them well? Absolutely. With a teenager, a few weeks so that they can get to know a mentor, unsupervised visits, weekends, like, I'm going to spend a weekend with you. I'm going to go home. So they have some time to transition. You would do beautifully if we had a family who would just show interest. And then we have kids that will not do well in a family setting ever. That their option is group care. They don't want a family. They have their own family. You are not their family. Thank you very much, but I don't need you to rescue me. I am fine because their level of trauma is so egregious. They're just not ready to assimilate into someone else's family. And that needs to be respected as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights, for sharing information about your background, your journey, about your organization. I really appreciate it. And if listeners want to find out more about Children's Harbor, where should they go?
childrensharbor.org. That's our website. Or you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram. You can find me, Tiffani Dhooge, and I will connect you to the organization. But please, if you have any questions, I love conversation. I love when people disagree with me. I love to banter. So please reach out to me. I'll have a conversation with you. You can tell me all your stuff.
It's important to be able to have difficult conversations and with people who you don't always or don't agree on everything with. I think that's something in society that people are really struggling with nowadays. So I appreciate you saying that. But thank you so much for your time and for being here. And until next time. Thank you for joining us on Rights and Remedies. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the legal issues facing victims and the pathways to healing. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Whether you're a survivor, an advocate, or someone looking to learn more, we're here to support and empower you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. You can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at ALM Law LLC for updates, resources, and more. Until next time, take care and remember that together we can make a difference.